So this is kind of the rig that I'm going through from scratch, from the beginning to the end, and we're going to work on this rig together. And this is kind of like how I like to do my faces. A lot of that stuff, that I show here is kind of based on my work that I was doing at DreamWorks and also what I've learned there over the years, working on these projects like Madagascar and Kung Fu Panda and Megamind and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of features built in that we also had at DreamWorks actually on those movies. So for example, we have the sticky lips, lip seal here. See if I can dial it on. So we have the lip seal from both sides, and we have the squash and stretch here on the head. So this is a little bit more of a cartoony face, but again, a lot of these techniques are more universal, so you can certainly use a lot of that stuff also for feature film as well.
I see. And how do you achieve? What is your way of achieving the lip seal?
So there are a couple of different ways how we can approach that. And I was thinking for this course actually showing one way first. So when I was preparing this course, what my goal was to make it easy to understand, to make it simple, not complicated, so that hopefully a lot of people will be able to follow this. So one way of doing the lip seal is doing it after everything else has happened, so that you figure out where the lips are at that particular position, and then just from this point, kind of like sealing it together. For me here in this way, and I started even recording videos for this, but then I felt like this is very complicated, especially if you do it manually without any scripting. It's a lot of manual labor. So then I was looking for a simpler way, and instead I was doing it now kind of like in parallel, so that we have one mouth that is always like kind of open and doing all the lips motion and everything, and then another head where the lips are closed, always closed, and then we're basically just going to blend between one and the other.
Oh, I see.
In a smart way. Yeah,
that's great. And I think you saw. Yeah, I mean, I've seen some of the video stuff that you demoed it to me, and I think you're gonna do that now. I think that's actually a feature that I've never seen in a rig.
Lip pushing.
Yeah,
that's also something that we had at DreamWorks on our rigs as well, and I wanted to kind of like show how this can be done in Maya as well, not just in the proprietary software at DreamWorks.
Yeah, that's really great. And how much, for something like this, how important it is, the topology of the character?
I think it's very, very important. Topology goes kind of like hand in hand, I feel, especially for face rigging. So in this class, I'm actually also going to talk a little bit about topology in the beginning of the course, where I'm going to share my thoughts on what I feel is important for topology and edge flow, and how it kind of factors into building good face rigs as well.
I see. Yeah, because I see here that you're able to achieve a lot of, appeal with not a lot of geometry. It's really awesome.
Exactly. Yeah. I feel that a lot of times I see students or even professionals, creating super high resolution faces, and I think this is good if you want to have a lot of detail and kind of find wrinkles and stuff like that. For example, on Jungle Book, like if you think about Shere Khan, like with all his wrinkles and everything, the tiger. Yeah. And I was amazed. I was blown away with how dense it was. Like sometimes you couldn't see any shading anymore. So that's how dense the wireframe was. But you also have to see that they're doing a lot of the shapes kind of in Mudbox or ZBrush. So they're sculpting it in the modeling department, and then rigging just gets it and plugs in the blend shapes and good to go, gives it to the animators. But for feature film, it's a lot more about kind of, as you said, the appeal of the character. And it's a lot more that's coming from the rigging side with deformers and joints and wires and stuff like that. So that's why, and it also makes the rigs a lot faster too, having a lower res geometry. So
yeah, definitely. And for as far as the squash and stretch, I was looking at the squash and stretch that you're able to achieve on the head. How do you achieve that? Like, what is underneath that? What do you have?
So I'm doing it with a lattice. I mean, there are a lot of different ways how I can do squash and stretch, really. With a lot of rigging in general, I think there are always a lot of different ways, which is something that I like. And you only have to find one way that works, which is great. So here in this particular case, I'm using a lattice that is driven with joints. And then we're using the lattice to deform the face, kind of post everything else, like post the blink and post the lip seal and so on and so forth. I feel in face rigging in particular, which is a little bit different than body rigging, a lot comes down to kind of like how much you're doing in parallel in terms of the deformations and how much you're doing in chain, like one after the other. So finding a good balance there, I think, is kind of what makes the difference of making a good face rig.
I see. And what about if we go back to the lid lift?
Sure.
How does that work? Like how?
So for the joints, or kind of like my goal for this course was not only showing, okay, it's how we do a face rig, because then we could have done everything with blend shapes. My goal was also kind of showing different techniques that can be used interchangeably a little bit. So I wanted to show a little bit of blend shape face rigging. I wanted to show a little bit of joint-based face rigging, and I wanted to show a little bit of curve-based face rigging with wire deformers. So in this face rig, we have a little bit of everything represented, and then also, of course, the lattice for squash and stretch. And for this particular feature of the lid pushing, what I'm doing is I'm not doing it with blend shapes. I'm doing it with joints, joint-based rigging, and then a lot of like math nodes in between, so that we can achieve kind of like a clamping effect of the lid, so that it can never go beyond each other. And then corrective blend shapes on top to be able to art direct the face or kind of like the shapes of the lids as well, and prevent crashing and stuff like that through the eyes.
That's cool. Yeah, that's really nice. And when you do blend shapes, right? When you do, especially for corrective blend shapes, what is your workflow usually?
Well, with face rigging, it's a little bit easier than with body rigging, I feel, because with face rigging, I usually work on a static face, and then just the static face that's not moving, that's not going anywhere. It's just the face that's moving around, and that gets blend shaped to the final body that's kind of like moving around and everything. So the face that you have static is just going to follow the body rig via blend shape. So that helps a lot in being able to kind of like just make the deformations kind of local, right? Don't have to worry about tangent space or anything like that for your offsets to apply. You can just kind of focus on the blend shapes. Okay, I just want these points to move in this direction.
I see. And do you use any special tools for helping you making the correctives?
I don't. I mean, there are tools there that help you make the correctives for the face rigging, or sorry, for in general making corrective blend shapes. There's, for example, Chad Vernon's shape inverter, CV shape inverter, which I've used in the past, which is great for kind of like elbows or joint-based corrective blend shapes. But as I said, because for the face, it's a little bit simplified. I want to show a way without any tools. That's also kind of was one of my goals here for this workshop, to show people, hey, look, this is how you can create face rigging without the need of any external tools, and without any plugins, and without any, like kind of special extra things, without any scripting even. This is kind of like all manual work. And of course, it can be scripted up to kind of speed up your workflow. But my goal was to show, hey, this is what can be done with vanilla Maya.
I see. What about when you work professionally, when you work at a studio and you do corrective shapes? Is it usually done completely by hand, or do you have a process, even a process to say organize your corrective shapes, right? Is there anything that is not proprietary that you use, or?
So I use some tools, kind of like off-the-shelf tools, or tools that you can download from the internet. I use the Epson Mesh a lot. This is kind of one of my favorite tools to make symmetry while still keeping the orders intact and vertex IDs intact. And then I also like to use Edge Flow Mirror to be able to mirror weights over to the other side. So those are the tool, Epson Mesh and Edge Flow Mirror. You can get them from, I guess, Creative Crash, or just type it into Google. You will be able to download them for free. Those are my two favorite tools. And whenever I have a class, I recommend those tools as well. They have saved me a lot of time, a lot of effort, or manual labor. And apart from that, in my professional environment, I usually script a lot of tools myself.
Got it.
Do a lot of tool writing to help me organize the blend shapes and those type of things. I've also heard very, very good things about Brave Rabbit. They have some really, really good kind of shape authoring tools. I think it's called Shapes, but I've never used it personally.
It's a nice one. I have used it in a couple of projects. It's really, really nice. for this rig right here, what is the most the most interesting feature to build? For if a student comes in and has to start building this face, what is the most challenging aspect of building a rig like this?
Um, I feel the eyelids are probably the most challenging, just because, well, especially in this particular face rig, the eyelids, they have a lot of features. They have like a blink, as I said, and a lip pushing that we talked about.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say they are probably the most complex feature here in this face rig. Everything else, as I said, and even the face lid, the eyelids as well, I try to make them as simple as I possibly could, so to be able to also explain it in a way that makes sense, so that people kind of get it and can also do it on their own, and they're not like kind of stuck with, oh my god, this is so complex, so complicated. So my goal, as I said, is always kind of make it understandable, and I like when people kind of get it and they understand like how it works, and then they can apply that to their own work and to their own face rigs.
Nice.
So I would say the eyelids is probably one, but then there are a lot of kind of a lot of tips and tricks along the way, really, in my personal workflow, that I'm going through when I'm demoing the things. There is also like kind of special tweakers on top of everything, kind of like a secondary layer of deformations that can be applied wherever needed.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are also the kind of touchless controls that we used to have at DreamWorks, or something similar anyways, where animators can essentially just click on the mesh wherever they want. Give a turn of highlighting here for a second. They can just click on the geometry and just move it around, so they don't even need to see the curves anymore.
That's nice.
And that was something that animators really liked at DreamWorks.
And how it's what is the main feature behind, underneath that? Like, how do you achieve something like that?
It's also just a matter of like kind of understanding how Maya works under the hood, and using some nodes to kind of like counter the action of the manipulator that you're doing.
Oh, that's nice. That's cool. And so the obviously, this rig it has a certain level, right? So it's done really, really nicely, really well. And when would you recommend that people come into this course? Would you recommend people to know already rigging, or
I think it would be good to have at least some basic understanding, like what is a joint and how can it do weights painting and things like that. So I'm not going to go too basic. So there is a certain set of knowledge kind of that would be an advantage of having a little bit of knowledge about rigging in general. But at the same time, I also try to start from the beginning, not about the like kind of terms and everything, but I try to make it so that really any level can follow the course. Like whether you have done a lot of face rigs before, or whether you have done no face rigs at all, and maybe just some body rigging, which is some basic rigging, you should be able to follow this course from the beginning to the end.
Got it. And what is your I know that there are a lot of different ways that people like to skin, to paint the weights of a skin. What is yours? Or what is your process of skinning
for
the face specifically?
I mean, that's also one of the reasons why I try to keep my face rigs, at least my personal work, if I can, as low as possible, because I don't like painting weights a whole lot. I feel it's very tedious, especially if you have a lot of resolution to paint with. It becomes slow and everything. So, I mean, there are some tools to make it easier, none of which I've shown here in this course, but there is NG skin tools that I've used a little bit in the past. But other than that, it's really just kind of like sitting there and understanding how you have to paint the weights. Usually like to start blocking out kind of like big chunks of areas that I know, like for example, for the jaw and the nose and so on and so forth. But yeah, I mean, it's just kind of like a lot comes down to experience and just practicing it a lot. That you kind of understand, okay, if I paint here, this is how it's going to behave.
Okay. Do you use like locking the weights in order to leave that kind of pristine?
Sometimes I do. I don't like locking weights a lot because it kind of prevents me. I usually tend to forget that I had locked weights, and then I just paint, and then I realize, oh, these weights were locked. So that's why I usually like to work with all the channels open or all the influences open and unlocked. But sometimes it's an advantage, especially if I want to kind of transfer weights from one joint to another. That's usually when I start going in and locking the weights that I don't want to change, and just the two joints where I want to transfer from to. Those are the joints that I unlock and then kind of like transfer the weights that way.
I see. That's nice. And when you Maya, I don't remember what version it was that introduced the post normalization.
Right.
Do you use the post or do you use interactive in your workflow?
So usually I prefer the interactive mode, and most of the riggers that I know, they the first thing they did when Maya or Autodesk they introduced the post mode, they switched it back to interactive, because Maya did not only introduce it in a Maya version, they also made it a new default back then. Oh, nice. So a lot of the people that I know, they just switch it back to interactive. There are some places when post can be an advantage, post normalization. But for me personally, it just makes more sense that if I see a value, I know that that's the value that this joint has, as opposed to, oh, there could possibly be, weights on other joints that I don't know about.
So, obviously you achieved a pretty good, a really amazing kind of level in rigging, right? So now if you need to give some advice to people, what do you think, in your opinion, what makes a good or great rigger?
Let's see. It's kind of like an open question, I guess, but a great rigger, I think a great rigger is somebody that doesn't really think about themselves too much, about like kind of, oh, I want to put this amazing feature in, and then it will slow down the rig and everything and pretty much become unusable, and just so that they can show up this amazing feature, right, in their demo reel. I think a good rigger is somebody who can listen to the animators, ideally has even some animation experience themselves, so that they know, what makes a good rig, what makes an intuitive rig, and what's important for animators. That's, I think, the key here, because at the end of the day, as riggers, especially in big companies, we're just kind of like, in a way, I don't want to make it sound too boring or too bad, but we're kind of like a service provider for the next department, right? So animators, they want to be able to work fast and interactive. I know that animators don't like having to play blast all their scenes all the time. So real-time rigs are, a big advantage of that. And making your rigs fast and not using too many constraints, those type of things, I think this is, for me personally, something that I want to try to achieve with my rigs, making the animator's job easier as opposed to harder. And also that comes down to the question that we talked about earlier with a lot of automation. While this might be very cool and like in demos to show off, usually animators, in my experience, the first thing to do is like kind of turn this feature off and then just hand animate. They like to have the control and like to be able to say, control the timing and stuff like that.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely had that same experience. And so there is a pipeline, like in a studio, there's a pipeline, there is the designers, and there's modeling, rigging, animation, and so forth.
Right.
In a big studio, what usually a rigger, not necessarily you in particular, but to your knowledge, a rigger in general, what is the department that he or she interacts with the most?
It's probably modeling, the department that comes before rigging, and animation department that comes between or after rigging, I guess. Since we sit exactly in between those two departments, I would say that's where most of the interaction happens with pretty much all the front end departments. Maybe not so much texturing, or look depth, but modeling for sure, and animation also. Yeah.
And how is it? What is that? When you interact with the modeling department specifically, right? How come do you interact with the modeling department so much?
Well, it's a lot about the edge flows that we were talking about earlier too. Making sure that the edge flows are good for what is needed, especially in the face, but also even for the body, right? So that we can make good deformations happen. That's why we need to have good topology. And for modelers, sometimes it's not that easy to understand how something is going to deform. They're more worried, or they're more interested in creating a good shape, a good form of the character, character when it's static.
Mm-hmm.
Then we have to kind of like educate them a little bit and show them, look, if you build your edge flows like this will help us really kind of bend in this area. But we need more resolution in this area because it's a high deforming area, and maybe less deformation is needed in that area. So that's why I think the collaboration is very, very important.
Yeah, totally. And so if somebody somebody wants to get into rigging, right? Maybe they have a little bit of experience. They've done some. Maybe they've rigged a character, one character, two characters, right?
Right.
Obviously, rigging is such a complex. It's a complex thing, and so it takes several, sometimes several years to get like really, really, really good, right?
Right.
So for the people that are starting now, and again, they've done a couple of rigs, but they're kind of stuck. They can't get to the next level. What would be a good advice for them so that they could get to the next level?
Right. I mean, I think never stop being curious would probably be my number one advice. Like, and that also kind of like leads into the last or previous question that we talked about. What makes a good rigger? I think the riggers that become a little bit arrogant, that say, "Oh, I know everything now, and I'm perfect." Those are probably not good riggers, right?
Mm-hmm.
I remember seeing a kind of tutorial or something by a guy from ILM a few years ago. I think it was for the first Pirates of the Caribbean, and this guy was so humble. I mean, he was at ILM and creating an amazing plugin. I was blown away when I saw it, and he was so humble. He was like, "Yeah, maybe sometimes the work is, kind of like." And this was just like very genuine, and like he was still also, you could see that he was also interested in kind of becoming better and learning, although he already had achieved this very, very high level of, skill sets. And that's why I feel like you've never learned enough. Like there's always something where you can improve, might it be, technical or artistic. So I would probably say, for somebody who feels stuck a little bit, just keep on going, keep on being curious, keep on learning. I'm doing the same, right now I'm learning API and other things that I'm interested in. So just kind of like keep on going. And, there's so much resource now these days online, where you can learn from other people. And that's also something I think that is important. Even if you have seen maybe some tutorials on face rigging or body rigging, whatever, seeing it from another person might give you a completely new perspective, something that you've never thought about. Because every rigger also, or most of the riggers I know, they work completely differently based on the companies that they've spent time with, So they might know different workflows, different techniques, and it might open your eyes to something that you never thought about.
Yeah. Plus, it's also, always a big proponent of, learning a certain subject from different sources, because a different source can explain it in such a way that it really sticks with me. And so, yeah, it's always awesome.
Absolutely.
To do that. Yeah, I totally agree. And for the face, so this is rigging in general. Is there anything special about the face that makes it a little bit more challenging to learn and to master?
I'm not sure if it's more challenging. I think there's just more focus on the face. I remember when I started rigging, I was more focused on body rigging. I was very interested in cartoony rigging for the body. So that's also what I did when I was at my first job, or first two jobs, I guess. At the Tale of Despereaux, I was more focused on body rigging. And then I remember seeing the movie, and most of the characters were kind of framed like this. So they were featured, the face was a lot more featured, right? Especially in a kind of animated feature film. And that's kind of when I decided, hey, I want to be able to work on this area. So I want to work on the face. So that my work is going to be more featured in the movies. And so that's what I did when I went to DreamWorks. I just asked them, hey, can I work on face rigs? I'm really interested in this area. It also interests me, like kind of seeing all the nuances of the emotions and everything. So I think if it's more challenging, then maybe just kind of like paying close attention to what's going on in the face, what's going on in human faces. Because we as humans, we're so trained from birth to kind of like, it's so ingrained in our DNA to react to faces, to react to emotions, seeing other people kind of, if it's a little blink or a little eyebrow raise, there's a lot going on in the human face essentially all the time. And sometimes we just can't see it, or we don't know how to pay attention to it. So this is something that personally interests me, and I think this is a very interesting subject, which maybe you could say makes the face a little more challenging than the body rig.
I see.
Which is more mechanical in a way.
Got it. And what is in general, what is both from an artistic point of view and a technical point of view, what is the main difference between a realistic face versus a cartoony face?
I think, well, it depends a little bit. I think what you can probably say is what is, maybe if we rephrase the question a little bit, what is the difference between a visual effects phase and a feature or animated feature film phase? My experience between those two companies was that for the animated feature films, it was a lot more that the face rigging or the shapes was done by the riggers as opposed to the modelers. So we would create kind of the different expressions and the smile, the frown, the angry eyebrows and stuff like that. While in visual effects, it's usually more that the modelers are providing those shapes, as I said earlier, the blend shapes, and we just kind of fold them in. So it's more about kind of sculpting amazing face shapes that look really, really interesting for those visual effects shots like Jungle Book or something like that.
I see. And you've done Jungle Book. I recently watched it, and I was blown away. And I'm not saying because you're here, but I was blown away by the visual effects. I was talking to my wife, and I was like, "Oh my god, this is amazing!"
I was blown away too, and I worked on it, and I was still blown away. And they just won like I think 5 visual effects society awards for this film.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So and
Totally
I'm still
deserved.
hoping for the Oscar, that we're going to win the Oscar as well with this project. I think that it just set a new bar for the quality of what is possible in visual effects.
Yeah, and how was it different? Like you worked on cartoony faces, both humanoids and animals, right?
Right.
In both realistic and cartoony.
That's right.
How would you approach when you work on an animal, right? Like let's say a
Right.
bear or a tiger, right?
Right.
How do you approach the ringing of it? How do you start, right?
It's usually it usually starts with reference, looking at a lot of reference online. I mean, these days the internet is just like a treasure, of good information. So you have YouTube, you have Google image search, with like super high resolution pictures of whatever you're looking for, really. And this is kind of like how you usually start, just looking at reference, looking at how do these animals or humans behave, and kind of studying, like their behavior and kind of their, like, how does it look, how does the skin move and stuff like that, and then trying to replicate that. And it doesn't matter whether it's a photorealistic film or a cartoony film, because even in cartoony films, like having that knowledge of like how stuff moves and how the different shapes behave in terms of like the underlying muscles will help you a lot, kind of making more informed decisions when you're rigging.
I see. That's nice.
So it's a lot about kind of like having that knowledge in the back of your head, like how stuff is moving.
I see. And how, for example, obviously in Jungle Book, there's a lot of fur, right?
Right.
How does that impact you as a rigger, the fur?
It does to some extent, in the sense that you always have to make the shapes more extreme. You always have to make them extreme, because with the fur and everything, it loses a lot of the kind of extremeness, essentially. So if you make very subtle shapes that are looking good on a naked character, once you have the fur on it, you won't see anything anymore. It will like be very, very subtle with the long fur kind of coming out. So I remember on Jungle Book, we had to make the shapes really, really extreme so that you could see it a little bit moving once the fur was rendered.
That's awesome. And that shows how, because this is basically artistic eye, is to know.
Totally, yeah.
Right. So yeah.
It was also a lot of testing too. Like we went back and forth, and with lighting and rendering, and they rendered, and we were like, "Where are the shapes? Like, did you turn the shapes on?"
Oh wow.
And then we kind of found out, okay, yeah, we have to make it really extreme so that we can see it once it's rendered with the fur. So it was kind of like a learning process for us too.
I see.